All right, guys, tonight we're going to be talking about how to get the most out of Zwift. And I've given myself about 2.5 hours to put together a quick tutorial on everything you need to know about getting up and running with Zwift and how to make it an awesome part of your life. So we're going to cover a few things. The first thing is going to be the setup, and then we're going to talk about Zwift, the platform, and then we might get into some additional pieces of technology that might be really helpful. You know, things like Strava, ZwiftPower.com, and some others. And then lastly, we'll talk a bit about racing and how to sort of get into racing. On the hardware side, it's pretty simple. You need a bike and you need a smart trainer. You've probably got that nailed down. A heart rate monitor, also pretty much crucial to have. I think probably the most common is the sort of chest strap style heart rate monitor. They're pretty comfortable, fairly accurate. But there are some other pieces that people don't talk about as much. That includes some kind of mat, depending on kind of how much sweat's involved. We'll sort of determine whether or not you need a mat, but they're pretty popular. The biggest thing that you can get that will actually affect your riding is going to be a fan. You can't have a large enough fan. You can't go too big. I use an industrial drum fan. And this makes actually a massive difference in a couple of ways. First, without that much air moving around, it's very difficult for your body to cool itself. And so sweat just accumulates and drips off of you. It gets all over your bike, all over the floor. It's really gross. Not a great experience. With a big fan, that goes away pretty much. No sweat really leaves your body because it's just evaporating so quickly. So that's kind of the hygiene piece of it. The performance piece is also massive. When your core temperature is rising and your body is unable to cool itself, your performance will decline. Your body's not going to suicide itself because you want to win a Zwift race. Your body's smarter than that. So that will be problematic. You need to keep your temperature in control. The way the body does that is sweat, and then as the moisture evaporates, it's a cooling sort of chemical reaction. So having a massive fan will actually improve your performance. Personally, I've seen around 15-20 watt FTP increase with using a fan over time. It's non-trivial. It really is a big deal. So get yourself a nice fan. The other thing I would say is if you're running Zwift on a laptop, these tables are really popular for a lot of reasons. They allow you to get to your laptop. You can put water on there. Also, don't forget to use your Zwift companion app. Even though I run my sort of setup at my desktop, I will still use the companion app to actually type and things like that because my keyboard's a little far away from me. It's kind of cumbersome to type. If you've got a laptop, that situation is much easier as long as your laptop is close to you. So we highly recommend sort of a table setup there. And I think that's pretty much it for hardware. The last thing though is that your setup in whatever configuration, whatever gear you have, is that it's very easy to get to and get set up. So, my situation back here, I fold the bike down, I move it into place, and I plug the power in. The process literally takes maybe 20 seconds, and I'm good to race. If it's much more cumbersome than that, then the utility of Zwift as a platform really falls off a cliff. Like if you have to set things up or move furniture around every time you want to race, it's not practical and it won't really happen, I don't think, in my experience. So make sure that whatever setup you have, it's semi-permanent and it's accessible. A lot of people boast about their pain caves. This is kind of what mine looks like, but here's some others that people have made, and it's pretty neat to have a space where you go to that's kind of dedicated for this. Now, not everyone can have a whole room dedicated to that, but you can certainly kind of set up your little piece of the house that's set up for your riding, and I think that'll pay some big dividends. So that's it on hardware. All right, now that you've got your kit ready and you've got Zwift installed and you're connected, congratulations. Welcome to the world of Zwift. There are so many things to do. And we're going to list them all out right now. So the first thing that I would call out are structured workout programs. What's so beautiful about Zwift is that there are lots of structured programs to choose from, And they all modulate in difficulty based on your functional threshold power. So basically you enter your threshold power into Zwift and it will adjust all of the workouts accordingly. So no matter if you're a pro that races in the Tour de France or you are a untrained cyclist, these workouts will be effective for you, which is just massive. That's one of the first things I would do when I get into Zwift, would be to join one of these workout programs. And they typically last, anywhere from 4 to 12 weeks. And they're kind of in these beginner, intermediate, and advanced buckets. So if you're new to Zwift, try beginner one and stick to it. And it's a lot of fun. Something to note about workout plans is that they often utilize something called erg mode. Essentially, if the workout requires you to put out, let's say 200 watts for a minute, in erg mode, the trainer will demand that from you. So regardless of your gearing and regardless of your RPM, the trainer will be getting 200 watts out of you. So if you're pedaling slowly, the resistance will be high. As you increase your cadence, the resistance will go down. The power you're putting out is the same, but you can achieve that in different cadence regimes. So it's really convenient and it's super nice. Now you might be asking, how do I know what my functional threshold power is for these structured workouts? Great question. You need to do a ramp test. You could do a full 1 hour functional threshold test. The problem is that those are actually really hard to do, especially for untrained cyclists, because the idea is that you hold a constant power more or less throughout the entire hour, and at that end of the hour you're absolutely drained, you're dead. It's actually quite difficult to do that, and if you're not well trained in holding constant power over time, it'll be slightly inefficient. You won't hold as much power as you could have held. So it's much better, in my opinion, to do a short ramp test. Usually the ramp tests are a bit of warm up, and then you gradually step up your power, and you go for as long as you can until you absolutely cannot go any further. It's really important on a ramp test that you give it everything you absolutely have. And this is kind of why they are notorious for being brutal, unpopular, and it's a sufferfest for sure. But once you do that, it will calculate essentially what your functional threshold power is, and that's what you can use in Zwift for your workouts. You populate it in the system once, and then it holds it until your FTP changes. So that's probably the very first thing you might want to do when you hop into Zwift and then hop into a program. Zwift is a collection of worlds that are all explorable. And so a lot of people just like to free ride. You can just pop into a world and just ride around, and you can make right turns, left turns, U-turns, and just explore the space. There are a discrete number of routes in the Zwift universe, and as you check off of these routes, you collect achievements. So I forget how many routes there are exactly in Zwift at the moment. They're always adding new routes, but after getting your FTP test in and getting enrolled in a workout, I think the next best thing to do is to collect all of the route badges. And here's why. It's a great way to explore, but it's also a great way to sort of challenge yourself. A lot of routes are flat and short. There are a lot of flat, long routes. And then you get into hilly routes, and you get into mountain routes. Some routes, like the Uber Pretzel, I forget how long. It's around 100 kilometers and a lot of elevation gain. So as you improve as a cyclist, you can start to tackle these harder, more advanced routes and get those under your belt. And you can even do them as group rides. It's a lot of fun. So there's a lot of routes. Go collect all the badges. It's a great thing to strive for. In addition to route badges, there's also just other general achievements, and there's a list of them in the Zwift app. And chasing those down is always a great time. So it's another fun way to explore the application as well. All right, so we've got workouts, we've got routes to chase, we've got various achievements, we have our FTP test, we have just free riding around. There's also pace rides, and they call them robo pacers. Zwift has 4 categories. There's A, B, C, and D. Zwift riders are organized into these 4 categories. D being sort of the lowest performing and A being high performing. If you're an untrained cyclist, very rare for you to be anything other than a D. Most cyclists can find their way into the C cat. There are a lot of cyclists who ride a lot, who train very hard, who never actually make it into the B category. And there are a fair amount of trained cyclists that do make it into B cat. So B cat is fairly competitive, and A cat is incredibly competitive. And this is also sort of where semi-pro and pro riders would live as well, up in the upper end of A cat. I say that because you'll find robo pacers that belong to these different categories. And that essentially tells you sort of the watts per kilogram range that those robo pacers will ride in. So you can see what their watts per kilogram is, their average speed over their route, and also how much elevation is involved. The robo pacers, for the most part, sort of maintain a constant output, but you will notice that on hills they tend to punch it a little bit more, and on descents they might back off a little bit, which kind of mimics how real people tend to ride routes. It's a great thing to ride with these robo pacers because there's often lots of other riders. You get a draft and there's kind of a fun community. It's a great way to tick off a bunch of miles, so definitely check that out. And it's also kind of fun to see how long you can hang with higher and higher level robo pacers, so always fun to do that. There's also events in Zwift. You've got group rides and fondos, and you've got races. There are also group rides inside of Zwift. So if, me and some of my friends all wanted to just get together, just a small group and ride around, we can absolutely do that. We can create an event and then invite people and all show up at the same time and then take off and go riding. There's also, I think it's called the rubber band effect, or the rubber band mode. But essentially, if you've got people you want to ride with, but everyone is at different, performant levels, the rubber band mode essentially keeps everyone together, and sort of everyone kind of gets locked into kind of the highest performing rider. So it's nice because you might want to go ride a route together or climb Alpe du Zwift or something. And even though you all have wildly different, FTPs or watts per kilogram ranges, this mode, as long as you're all pedaling, will kind of keep you all together. So it's a nice way to kind of get a workout with friends. And that is very common as Zwift to pull up some audio comms on Discord or just even on your phone, hang out, chat, and talk while you're working out. It's a blast. So definitely give that a go. And the last thing, and for me, the most important thing that you can do on Zwift, at least the most fun, is to race. Now, racing, there's a lot to it. It's kind of its own can of worms, and so we're going to dedicate a whole section to that in just a second at the end. Before we do that, I'm going to introduce some other technology platforms that are going to enhance your Zwift experience even more. So let's take a look at that. First off is a website called zwiftpower.com. If you log into Zwift Power and make a profile here, which if you are going to race, you absolutely need to, you can view all of the events and all the races. What's nice here about Zwift Power is there's some advanced filtering that you can use to find specifically just races of a certain length. There's also, you can find races of like a certain competitiveness. A lot of advantages to using a website like Zwift Power. And when we talk more about racing, we'll get back into here, but you can see lots of metrics and we'll dive into it, your rankings in here and all that good stuff. So that's Zwift Power. Next up is Strava. Strava, super helpful. It's nice because it's sort of like the repository of all of your effort that happens in Zwift, but also when you ride outside. So Zwift can manage, kind of all of your physical activities, even if you're doing a different regime of activity, whether that's running or swimming or something. It's a great way mostly to manage your level of fatigue over time. Zwift has the ability to track your level of fitness, your fatigue, and your form, which can be really helpful when you're racing and really helpful when you're new to the sport. Well, helpful really anytime. to make sure that you're not getting into chronic fatigue or that you're putting yourself at risk for injury by training too hard too often. So really powerful tool. We really recommend using that pretty religiously, actually. It can be super helpful. ZwiftRacing.app is a website that also tracks your ELO score. So it's like Zwift Power in that it gives you a rating. The nice thing about the Zwift Racing app is the rating system is a bit more sophisticated, so it's actually a better indicator of how good you are at winning races. And so if you really become a data nerd, you're really trying to stack your ranking, it's just a different calculation of your cycling abilities. And sometimes it's fun to track your ability via this particular application. It's getting more and more popular. And lastly is a website called intervals.icu. Really, really interesting data mining of your rides. So if you're, this is probably beyond what most people would do. But, if you are getting competitive, this is a great way to analyze your efforts, measure things like heart rate drift, the rate of drift. You can, as is in the name, it will actually isolate sort of key performance bits. It finds, these portions of the ride where you put out, a significant amount of effort. It will kind of find the timing of that effort and then find the average amount of watts. So it gives you kind of the different intervals that you did throughout that particular effort. And so you can see, oh, wow, I did I did a minute and a half at 375 watts. Pretty cool. Here are my sprint efforts. You did 12 seconds at 900 watts 3 times. And so it just gives you a sense of what you're capable of. Okay. The whole point of this video was really for me to get to this part, which is the racing. So how do I find a race? How do I join a race? And how do I get the most out of racing? Glad you asked. So I always start at zwiftpower.com. Typically races, I might have an afternoon where I've got some time. I want to find a fun race. I'll come here. I'll put the race filter on and just look at some races and find one that looks interesting. And then I will sign up for it. Signing up is super easy. You just literally click this button and then sign up. That's all you have to do. Here are some tips and tricks, though, when trying to find a race. This is where you can see how many people are signed up. Now, take this with a grain of salt. Most riders, probably like you, are going to sign up for the race like moments ahead of time. So there's usually quite a few more riders than indicated here, but it is also kind of generally helpful to see which rides are going to be more popular. I like racing with more people. Also, as you're trying to sort of increase your Zwift ranking, there are advantages to racing against more people versus smaller fields. So larger races are typically fun. Now, what's interesting is that you're pretty much free to join any race. If you have any questions about that, you can look at the description where they might have, some notes about who the race is tailored for. But pretty much you can join anything. There are races that are part of like a series where they actually have like GC rankings. So like your score from race to race to race is being tallied against everyone else who's racing all these races. And like right now I'm a part of a series, and I think I'm second in GC, which is really fun. And so, I race every Tuesday in this particular series, and all my points get accumulated. Some races are like that. A lot of races aren't. And even if races are like that, you can still hop in a race. It's not a big deal. The description is also very important because not all races are scratch races, which is where it's like everyone hops in and the first one across the finish line wins. There are also point races where certain sprint segments or KOMs are going to have first across the line points, and they might go 10 deep, 15 deep, 20 deep, 5 deep. It really just depends. And the points assigned to each of those positions might also be on a different scale. I think the most common is like first 10 across the line gets 10, 9, 8, 7, 6, and so forth points. And then usually at the end, there's some kind of, common format is 80 points, 79, 78, and they kind of go down from there. And then all those points are tallied. And even though you might have been the first across the line, it's conceivable that maybe you came in 15th place because you did not do well in any of the other, point segments. So, point races definitely make things interesting. They are in the minority. There's not a ton of them, but something fun to try out. There's also time trials. Team time trials are actually pretty popular on Zwift, where you get your team together and you race, and it's just you on a course trying for the fastest time. And typically you're in a league. The biggest league that you can join is the Zwift Racing League. They operate, I think they do four seasons kind of in the fall, winter, spring time frame. And you can hop on a team with, I think, 6 to 12 riders, and then every week you race, and it's pretty competitive. It's pretty fun. And, they have teams in all categories. So even if you're a D racer, you can still get on the fun and do some racing, and it's an absolute blast. So you've registered for a race. You're excited. How do you actually get in the race? You fire up Zwift. You just go to events, and if you've already registered for it, it's going to have it bookmarked for you. You just click on it, you hit join, and then it pops you into the pen, and then you have a big countdown timer, and when the time goes, you go, and that's it. So pretty easy. After your race is done, you can obviously upload to Strava. I should say this, it's really important that you link your Zwift account to your Strava. If it's not on Strava, it didn't happen. So definitely do that. That way, after every ride, it always gets uploaded to Zwift, and all of your ride information is there. So after your race, when you go back to Zwift Power, and Zwift Power is not the fastest thing to update. Sometimes it takes a few minutes, but you go back to Zwift Power and you'll see the actual, ranking of the finish. What's interesting is you might notice that there are, maybe you finished in Zwift, like you finished in 7th place, but then you log into Zwift Power, you notice like you're 3rd, you got on the podium. That's pretty common because Zwift as a platform doesn't regulate who races or what equipment they race on. So you might have riders who don't have dynamic smart trainers, and they're just using speed sensors or like really cheap, not accurate dynamic trainers that have poor power output, reliability, and accuracy. And most race organizers have requirements about the kind of equipment that you need. A lot of riders who are just messing around in Zwift don't even have a heart rate monitor, so you can't really validate the effort that well. So sometimes when you're racing in Zwift, you have some really casual people who just pop in on whatever speed cadence. It's not even tied to power, and they're putting out like 400 watts, and they're like doing amazing performances, but they're not real. But they're still having fun, right? They're still playing. But what's nice is that once you finish the race and you get into Zwift Power, you're only seeing riders who have heart rate monitors typically, who are on calibrated trainers typically, and have been vetted a little bit. So that's really nice. And that's what really matters. So definitely check out Zwift Power, and sometimes you'll be kind of surprised about how well you did, which is kind of fun. All right. Last thing I'll say. In Zwift Power, when you race, you will get a ranking. Your ranking is, the range is 600 to 0. 600 is like no ranking, bad, which you start out with, by the way. As a new rider, you just automatically have a ranking of 600. And as you get closer to 0, the better you get. If you have a sub 200 ranking, that's pretty respectable. When you get down below 100, I mean, that's pretty phenomenal. That's pretty phenomenal performance. In your Zwift profile, it will show you actually like what your actual ranking is in your country and in your team, if you're part of a team, and also globally. So it's pretty interesting. You know, if you work really hard, you can kind of see your ranking. Wow, I'm like in top 2,000 riders in the US. You know, I think right now I'm sub 500, which is really fun. So trying to get the top 200, that would be a dream, you know, so working on that. But your ranking is established by taking the average of your 5 best performances over the last 90 days. So it's a rolling score. If you stop racing, your ranking is going to slide. And so it's kind of an always updating reflection of your performance. You'll see after you finish a race, you'll see what your kind of result was. And, you know, if it's one of your top 5, it'll be grabbed and incorporated into your race ranking. Something about ranking that's important to understand is that you might come in first on a race and your race ranking doesn't improve at all, because it's all about who are you racing against. If you race against stronger opponents than you and you place better than them, you will see a good result and it will positively affect your ranking. Now, the math here is kind of interesting. It actually takes the strength of, I think, the top 5 finishing riders, averages that value out, multiplies it by 0.9. That's like the strength of the race. And then essentially it takes the number of finishers and does a gradation step scale from that kind of race quality and steps it down depending on how many riders there are. So really what you want to do if you're trying to improve your rank is you want to find races that have good riders in them, and then you want to place as well as you can, and it's easier to do that if there are lots of riders. And so big fields are good, and you know, high race rankings are good, strength of race is good. And if you find those kinds of races, then you'll generally just kind of build your ranking. And this, we're getting kind of in the weeds. Honestly, if you start racing, you're going to see a great improvement. You don't really have to start cherry picking races or doing all this stuff until you're, you know, I don't know, kind of getting on the upper end of your ranking. So, yeah, but that's basically it in a nutshell. It's so much fun. It's so great. I love kind of before the race, checking out everyone who's entered, looking at their power profiles, kind of picking a few people to mark. Then when you hop in the race, you're trying to kind of put their jerseys and their cycling kit, put that to like a name in Zwift Power so that you kind of have an idea of who you want to chase after, what moves to follow. There's actually a ton of strategy in racing in Zwift. And probably the one tip or trick I will leave with you, because there's so much to cover and possible doing this video, is this. You never want to be in the front. You always want to be using the draft. And the draft is actually the best, typically kind of towards the back of the pack. So it's a great place to be. Also great visibility. You can kind of see what's going on everywhere. So use the draft to your advantage. Don't be the guy that's riding on the front. Never want to do that. Burn too much power. All right. That is the quick and dirty version of how to get the most out of your Zwift experience. And looking forward to riding and racing with you. Take care. Bye.